Rain hammered against the pavement as Maya stood outside the house that had been her home for 7 years, her suitcase toppled over beside her, clothes spilling onto the wet ground. The door had just slammed shut behind her, and through the window, she could see her husband Rajesh already on his phone, probably calling his mother to celebrate finally getting rid of the defective wife. Her hands trembled not from the cold, but from the devastating realization that the man who once promised to love her forever had just discarded her like trash because her body couldn't give him a child. At 32, Maya found herself homeless, heartbroken, and labeled as worthless by the very person who was supposed to stand by her through everything. If you believe in second chances, if you believe that a person's worth isn't defined by their ability to have children, then please like this video, share it with someone who needs hope today, comment your thoughts below, and subscribe to our channel. Your support means everything, and it helps us bring more stories of courage and redemption to people who need them most. The weeks that followed were a blur of survival. Maya moved into a small, dingy apartment on the outskirts of the city, the kind of place where the walls were thin enough to hear every argument, every cry, every moment of despair from her neighbors. She had been a homemaker throughout her marriage, and Rajesh had insisted she didn't need to work, that her job was to manage the house and eventually raise their children. Now that independence he'd stripped from her became her greatest obstacle. Her savings were minimal, her resume was outdated, and every job interview felt like another rejection, another confirmation that she truly was worthless, just as Rajesh and his family had said. She took whatever work she could find. First, it was data entry from home, barely enough to cover rent. Then she added evening shifts at a call center, her voice growing hoarse from speaking to angry customers who saw her as nothing more than a faceless employee to yell at. The exhaustion was crushing, but worse than the physical tiredness was the emotional weight she carried everywhere. At night, alone in her apartment, Maya would sometimes find herself crying without knowing exactly why the tears started. Was it grief for her marriage? Shame over her infertility? Anger at how easily she'd been thrown away? Or was it simply the overwhelming loneliness of realizing that the life she'd built for 7 years had been nothing but an illusion, and the person she'd trusted most had never truly loved her at all? Months passed, and Maya slowly began to rebuild something that resembled a life, though it felt more like going through motions than actually living. She avoided her old friends, unable to bear their pity or their questions. Her family lived in another state, and she hadn't told them the full truth about why her marriage ended, couldn't bear to hear the disappointment in her mother's voice or the "I told you so" from relatives who'd always thought Rajesh's family was too good for her. The isolation became its own kind of prison, and Maya began to understand that Rajesh hadn't just taken her home and her marriage. He'd taken her sense of self, her confidence, her belief that she deserved happiness and love. Everything changed on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon when Maya was working her shift at a small cafe she'd recently started at to supplement her income. The cafe was quiet, just a few customers scattered among the tables, when a man walked in with a little girl clutching his hand. The child couldn't have been more than 5 years old, with enormous brown eyes and pigtails that bounced as she walked. The man himself looked exhausted, the kind of bone-deep tiredness that spoke of sleepless nights and overwhelming responsibility. His suit was expensive but rumpled, his tie loosened, and there was something in his expression that Maya recognized immediately because she saw it in her own mirror every day, the look of someone barely holding themselves together. They sat at a corner table, and Maya went to take their order. The little girl asked for hot chocolate with extra marshmallows, her voice so sweet and hopeful that Maya couldn't help but smile for the first time in what felt like forever. The man ordered coffee, black, and as Maya wrote it down, the little girl suddenly said, "Daddy looks sad. Can you make him smile too?" The innocence of the question hit Maya straight in the heart, and when she looked up, she saw the man's eyes had filled with tears that he was desperately trying to blink away. Without thinking, Maya knelt down beside the table and told the little girl, "You know what? I think your daddy is lucky to have someone who cares so much about his happiness. That's very special." The girl beamed, and the man mouthed a silent thank you, and in that brief exchange, something shifted in the universe, though Maya didn't know it yet. Over the following weeks, the man and his daughter became regular customers, always coming in on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons. Maya learned that his name was Arjun, that he was a CEO of a tech company, and that he was raising his daughter Anya alone after his wife had passed away from cancer 2 years earlier. The weight of single parenthood combined with running a company was crushing him, and Maya could see it in every line of his face, in the way his shoulders sagged when he thought no one was looking. But what struck her most was how devoted he was to Anya, how he never checked his phone when she was talking, how he listened to every rambling story about her day at kindergarten as if it were the most important thing in the world. Anya, for her part, seemed to have decided that Maya was her special friend. She would save drawings to show her, would insist that Maya sit with them when the cafe wasn't busy, would ask Maya questions about everything from why the sky was blue to whether Maya thought unicorns were real. And Maya, who had spent months feeling worthless and broken, suddenly found herself needed and wanted, not for what her body could or couldn't do, but simply for who she was. This little girl who barely knew her saw value in her presence, and that recognition was like water in a desert. One evening, as Maya was closing up the cafe, Arjun came back alone. He looked nervous, almost frightened, and Maya's first thought was that something had happened to Anya. But he quickly assured her that his daughter was fine, that she was with his mother for the evening, and then he said something that would change everything. He told Maya that Anya had been struggling terribly since her mother's death, that she'd stopped talking for nearly 6 months, that she'd wake up screaming from nightmares, that she refused to connect with any of the nannies or therapists they'd tried. But something about Maya had broken through those walls. Anya talked about her constantly, drew pictures of her, asked when they could see her again. And Arjun, watching this transformation in his daughter, had started to notice Maya too, had seen the sadness she tried to hide, had recognized in her the same brokenness he carried inside himself. What he said next took Maya's breath away. He told her he'd learned about her situation, that he'd overheard her explaining to the cafe owner why she needed more shifts, and he wanted to offer her a position. Not as a nanny exactly, but as a companion for Anya, someone who could be there when he had to work late. Someone who could help his daughter feel safe and loved again. The salary he mentioned was more than double what she was making between all her jobs. But more than that, he said something that made Maya's carefully constructed walls finally crumble. He said, "I see you, Maya. I see how kind you are, how patient, how you light up when Anya talks to you. And I see the pain you're carrying. You don't have to tell me about it if you don't want to, but I recognize it because I'm carrying the same weight. Maybe we can help each other carry it. Maybe we're both tired of being alone with our grief." Maya stood there in the empty cafe, tears streaming down her face, unable to speak. This man who barely knew her was offering not just a job, but recognition, validation, a place where she belonged. He wasn't asking her to be something she couldn't be. He wasn't measuring her worth by her ability to fulfill some biological function. He was simply saying, "You matter, you're valuable, you're seen." After months of being invisible, of being discarded and forgotten, someone was actually choosing her, and that choice had nothing to do with what she could produce or provide. It had everything to do with who she was as a person. She said yes, though she could barely get the word out through her tears, and Arjun smiled for the first time since she'd met him, a real smile that reached his eyes and made him look years younger. That night, Maya went home to her tiny apartment, and instead of crying tears of despair, she cried tears of something she'd almost forgotten existed: hope. The months that followed were transformative. Maya moved into the guest house on Arjun's property, a small but beautiful space that felt like a palace compared to her previous apartment. Her days were filled with Anya, and she discovered that caring for this little girl wasn't work at all but rather the most fulfilling thing she'd ever done. They baked cookies together, they read stories, they had tea parties with stuffed animals, they painted messy pictures that Arjun would proudly display in his office. And slowly, Anya bloomed. The nightmares became less frequent, the smiles more common, the laughter genuine and free. But what Maya hadn't expected was how much she would bloom too, and how her relationship with Arjun would evolve into something neither of them had planned. It started with simple conversations in the kitchen after Anya went to bed, sharing stories of their pasts, their pain, their fears. Arjun told her about his wife, about the guilt he felt for sometimes being relieved that her suffering had ended, about his terror that he wasn't enough for Anya. Maya told him about Rajesh, about the infertility treatments that had failed one after another, about the day she'd been thrown out and told she was worthless, about the shame that still haunted her. If this story is touching your heart, if Maya's journey is resonating with you, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment sharing your thoughts, and subscribe to our channel. Stories like these need to be heard, and your engagement helps us reach more people who need hope and healing. And Arjun, this successful CEO who commanded boardrooms and made million-dollar decisions, looked at her with such tenderness and said, "You are not worthless. You are not broken. Your value has nothing to do with whether you can have children. You are valuable because you are kind, because you are patient, because you see people for who they are, because you love my daughter as if she were your own, because you are you." Those words, coming from someone who had every reason to be as broken as she was, healed something in Maya that she hadn't known could be healed. Love, when it came, was quiet and inevitable, like dawn breaking after the longest night. It wasn't dramatic or sudden but rather a gradual realization that the person sitting across from you at breakfast was the person you wanted to see every morning for the rest of your life. That the sound of their laughter was your favorite sound in the world. That when they hurt, you hurt, and when they smiled, you felt it in your chest like sunshine. Arjun proposed on an ordinary evening while they were helping Anya build a blanket fort in the living room, and it was perfect precisely because it was so simple, so real, so completely different from the grand proposal Rajesh had orchestrated years ago with roses and candles but no genuine love behind it. If you believe in happy endings, if you believe that people deserve second chances at love and happiness, please comment, "Second chances are real," below right now. Maya married Arjun in a small ceremony with only close friends and family, and when the officiant asked if she would take this man to be her husband, she looked at Arjun and Anya standing beside him, and she realized that she'd found something far more valuable than what she'd lost. She'd found a family that chose her not because of what she could give them but because of who she was. She'd found love that didn't come with conditions or expectations. She'd found her worth not in her ability to create life but in her ability to nurture it, to heal it, to transform it through simple acts of kindness and presence. Years later, when people would ask Maya about her story, about how she went from being thrown away to finding the kind of love most people only dream about, she would always say the same thing. She'd say that the day Rajesh threw her out was the worst day of her life, but it was also the day her real life began. Because sometimes we have to lose everything we thought defined us to discover what actually makes us valuable. Sometimes we have to be broken down completely to be rebuilt into something stronger, more authentic, more whole. And sometimes the people who reject us are actually doing us the greatest favor, because they're clearing the path for the people who will truly see us, truly choose us, truly love us for exactly who we are. Maya had learned that her worth was never dependent on someone else's ability to see it, and that the right people would recognize her value without her having to prove anything at all. She'd learned that being thrown away by someone who never deserved her was actually the first step toward finding the people who did, and that second chances aren't just real, they're often better than anything we had before.